Over the last several months, I've had dads in our community reach out to me about the development of their kids, about their intellectual development, their physical development, getting them ready for school, and asking me questions about how, as a dad, do I get my son or daughter ready for school when they may learn a little bit differently. Then, after some probing, some conversation and questions from me, I learn that their child has autism. And it's that topic that we're talking about today, parenting autism. I brought on Jason Infinger today because he is the founder of Parenting Autism, an organization dedicated to creating breakthroughs for families impacted by autism. We've had conversations about this topic a couple times over the last couple months because I think it is timely. I've also had conversations with a close friend whose son has autism, and it's at the front of my mind. Now, Jason's story is inspired by their youngest son's diagnosis of autism at age 3. And now Jason focuses on empowering parents and supporting the whole family, not just the child, through the process. Jason aims to make a lasting positive impact on the lives of families that are affected by autism. And today we're diving into a conversation about what it means to be a dad of a son with autism. Fascinating conversation. Jason's going to leave you with some really good tips and do's and don'ts if you are a parent navigating this right now. This episode on the Dads Making a Difference podcast with Jason Infinger starts right now. Jason, welcome to the Dads Making a Difference podcast. Great to see you today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. I appreciate the invite.
Man, we were trying to make this happen a few weeks back, and we both had little setbacks and things in our lives that didn't allow it to happen. So I always appreciate flexibility, and I'm glad that we're finally able to have this conversation because I know the work that you do, and I know that your message is powerful. So yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for being so flexible.
Of course. I'm looking forward to it.
So Jason, why don't you share a little bit about what you do with parenting autism? Because I feel that there's a lot of stigma around the word autism. Somebody hears it, they don't understand what it means. They might have a friend who's raising a kid with autism. Maybe they don't have someone with autism in their family. But then there's dads listening to this right now. I can name a few who are in our community who have children who have autism. And so why don't you share a little bit about you, what it was like for you to get started in this, and then we'll dive deeper into your work and why you're doing this.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when my son was 2.5, he had some delays. And so us going to our pediatrician basically said, don't worry, he's just delayed. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And so we kept getting kind of, I want to say pushed off, but it wasn't a priority. And so we had a family friend over for dinner, and that family friend had some experience with it and said, hey, you may want to have him, kind of checked out, that kind of thing. And since pediatricians don't diagnose autism, we had to go to a specialist. So us going to a specialist and doing some testing on that side, we took him to get some testing. And then, a couple of weeks later, we get our son's diagnosis in the mail, as odd as that sounds, in the mail. So, you're left as a parent, imagine getting that letter and, trying to figure out like, what's the next thing. Right. And of course you go to Google first and try to figure out, what is the cure? And obviously there isn't a cure. So, but you don't know what to think at that point. So you kind of go down a rabbit hole trying to figure out, what are parents doing? What does this mean? And, along the course, of trying to figure that out, it really is, say stressful for the whole family. Right. Because it's not, I don't want to compare it to cancer, but it's something to where the whole family, it really involves the whole family, not just your child.
Yeah. So your son was 2.5. You find out in the mail. Is your son, was he the oldest? Was he your only child at that time, or do you have other children?
Yeah, I have 2 boys. And so he's the youngest. He's the youngest. And I guess the best way I've had this kind of explained to me through some developmental pediatricians is, when you start out and have a family, right, there is everything is centered around, quote, the family, right? When you start to have, when you have a child that gets a diagnosis, everything becomes child-centric, right? So you're family-centric at first, then you become child centric, right? So there's three different types of things. There's a family centric dynamic, there is a child centric, right? And there's a parent centric dynamic, right? And so you start out as a family centric, and then you have a child that gets a diagnosis, and all of a sudden everything shifts to that child. Everything, all the resources, the whole family shifts to the kid centric dynamic, right? And the problem with that is it's okay temporarily until parents figure out how to navigate the world, but for a lot of families it never shifts back. It never goes back to family
Mm.
centric. It always stays child centric, which I think is why, because we hear from thousands of parents, why marriages and things become even more difficult, because all the focus is on that child.
Mm. Fascinating. We chatted a while ago on a discovery call just to get to know each other a little bit. I shared with you that I was in
Yeah.
education and that I've been in education for quite some time and working in
Yeah.
situations. I work with lots of families who have, children with diverse needs, children with autism, disabled students, you name it, just
All
a
right.
wide range and a huge community. Even in families where there hasn't been a diagnosis, as you said, you start to see this child centric piece take over. For you, what were some of the things that you did, maybe as a dad, maybe as a husband, that
Mm.
kind of helped you transition, or did you transition from being that child centric moment where he's 2.5, you have another son? What does that look like to go through that period of transition where it's family centered? We're so excited, got the diagnosis, child centered. Now what?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are two things. One of which is, I think my wife, even when we first got married, I brought this up and I still do. I'm like, it starts with you and I. Like
Mm.
everything in this family centers around her and I, right? Everything does. The second part is I read a book years ago. I think it was Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. And I think the second or third chapter in that. Have you read that book?
I have. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's I'm gonna get his name wrong, Godfrey or
God.
something like that. But he's been studying marriages for years, and one of the things he talks about is some of the top five things if you have in a marriage, it will always work. What's the number one thing? Do you know what it is?
Give it to us. Give it to us.
It's support. It's
Mm.
support. Right? Support. And, my wife and I can approach things differently. And sometimes we'll stop and go, look, we're saying the same thing differently, right? We're agreeing with each other differently, right? So we slow
Mm.
down and we'll even stop and say, is that supportive? Like if somebody will say something kind of out of haste. And I think all families have this sense, but I also think things get escalated when you have a child that's diagnosed with special needs in your family, because there are, like for my son, for example, we have 7 different therapists/teachers,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Organizing that in itself, right, and getting the best possible care for your child, is stressful, right? So my wife and I were good at breaking up all the things that need to be done on that side. So there's a constant line of communication. But at the end of the day, it's like, how can I support you,
Mm.
right? So that seems to work the best for us.
And supporting each other. How can I support you? I like what you said there. Agreeing with each other differently. And I think there's lots of times
Yeah.
we do that with people, right? Like you have to take a step back and say, wait a second, we're saying the same thing. Like we're on the same side here. We have the same perspective. We're communicating it in a different way. And because we're communicating it in a different way, this has us going at each other. So let's take a
Right.
second to do that. I appreciate you bringing that up. It's a good reminder for a lot of the guys on here to just any situation. Wait a second, are we just
Yeah.
agreeing differently? So thank you. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
how so you had a son. He's older. How old was he at this time?
My
So
oldest,
yeah.
he was at the time of diagnosis, he was 9, I guess, 9,
Okay.
10 years old. And by the way, let me say this real quick, just because I think it's fascinating, because Father's Day just passed, right?
Yeah.
So I saw a list on Father's Day, and it was listing the top 20 celebrated holidays. Did you see it? Did you see the
I did
list?
not know.
It
No.
goes Christmas, Mother's Day. Now, where do you think Father's Day was on a list from 1 to 20?
First of all, I don't know if I can name 20 different holidays, but I put Father's Day somewhere between 16 and 18.
Yeah, 20.
20.
I
Wow.
mean, Arbor Day. right, is 13. Columbus Day is 16. I don't even know. I can't name those holidays either. But I think us fathers have to get together and kind of form a father festival or something, because
I like it.
we need to turn that back.
I like
20,
it.
moms get two. And I get it. They should get all the credit on that side. But come on, 20? I don't think it's that far off.
No,
I
I
just
don't
thought it was
think.
interesting.
Yeah. Interesting is a word. Yeah. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're
Yes.
trying to do here, Jason, right? Is to draw awareness of, dads matter and what we do matters. So as your son's
Yep.
growing up
Yep.
now and he has a diagnosis, he has autism. What does that look like? How does it differ from maybe something, quote unquote, I don't like the word typical, but for our listener, like the
Yeah.
typical experience for a parent? You have a son who at the time's like 6.5 years older. How did
Mhm.
this experience differ for you and your wife?
Yeah. I think that my wife, I think, had a better feel or idea ahead of time. And I know one of the biggest things for fathers is they go into some denial around things.
Mm,
And for me, it wasn't about the denial piece as much as it was about, like, I can't get care for him until he has a diagnosis. Like, not through insurance, ABA therapies. There's all these things. The only way that dominoes fall is if he gets a diagnosis and gets care. Whether he is or not at this point,
yeah.
we need to look at all of our options and see what we can do. Because I didn't care about the diagnosis as much as I did just getting him help, period. Right. And I knew the sooner that you do that, the better. Right.
Wow. How
That
old
part
is
was
your son
important.
now?
He just turned 14. So
Wow. Yeah,
for
12
us,
years.
like, and this brings back to, how we handled things. I think there are definite cliffs in autism, right? So that first cliff that we were tackling was, the first one was getting a diagnosis, which is a major cliff for any family, right? You do go through stages of mourning and things differently, because all year, if you think about it, as a father to a son, especially, right? You have something about your hopes, your dreams, your wants that you have for your son, and you want these amazing things for him, and you're going to be
Yeah.
there step by step with him, going through stuff with him. And then to get a diagnosis, to go, okay, that plan is out the door,
Hmm.
right? Regroup. What is the new plan? Right? What is the new plan around that? So that there's that first cliff of autism is the diagnosis. The second cliff is starting school. The next cliff is puberty, and then you go into, adulthood and what that starts to look like. So there are
Wow.
definite cliffs of autism.
Okay, thinking selfishly right now as a dad, your wife is super supportive. You've gone through this.
Mhm.
You're starting to realize that you might be agreeing differently, and you're supporting each other. Now, take that. You can't take it completely out of the equation, but for you personally, as you
Yeah.
navigated, you went through the diagnosis, you went through the starting
Mhm.
school. Like,
Mhm.
as you're going through this, how are you processing this journey as a dad?
Yeah. I'm trying to just, at this point, I'm just gathering as much information as I can, right? I feel like I was consuming things at a high rate, right? Whether it was, Google, magazines, anything, people, parents. I will say that early on, you know, we were trying to figure out and navigate the world of autism, and that was a major issue. And so our best advice we got from parents that were probably 3 or 5 years ahead of us. And so
Yeah.
we just kind of kept reaching out to certain, groups and things. And we didn't find, and I'm in Los Angeles, and we reached out to support groups, and I reached out to them. There was like 17, I think.
Wow.
And none of them really kind of hit the stride that we were looking for as terms of support.
Mm.
And so we really felt kind of isolated. And so for me, it was really about just fact finding mission about, okay, what are all the options? Just getting things in front of me, right? What are those things look like? And then try to process what that starts to look like.
So, as you're going through this now, your own experience of seeking out information, seeking community, connection, mentioned the word isolation, and
Yeah.
it couldn't be easy going through that. But you learned through this experience that other people would need the same, right? Did you
Yeah.
immediately, as you were going through this, start to make little notes and pointers for yourself? Like, hey, somebody else could benefit from this. Somebody else could benefit from this. Or is the work that you're doing now, and we'll get into it, is this in hindsight thinking, man, I wish I would have known?
Yeah, it's probably the first. I think that I felt like, with my business background, I was like, why doesn't this exist? Like, why can't I just why can't I go to a nonprofit organization and they give me things? And let me put this in context too. So with autism, and it has a spectrum, right?
Right.
So the way it works is, so there's mild, moderate, and then severe, right? And then you have the ages of the child, right? So you have this full-on spectrum of kids in terms of where they're at, right? So even getting sources and information that are supposed to help, they're not like, my son is nonverbal, right? 40% of the kids on the spectrum are nonverbal, right? So the issue becomes, getting advice, right, from someone that doesn't know my son at all. What I'm saying? It's almost, it's so vanilla that it
Right.
doesn't really almost apply. So going to a nonprofit, for example, there are some amazing nonprofits, don't get me wrong, but unless they're like, we're doing a consultation and doing a deep dive into what my son does and doesn't do and all these things, every child is so unique. It just becomes important to really get that specific, those needs met. And every family is totally different, totally
Yeah.
different.
Every child is different. Every family's dynamic is
Yeah.
different. The environment, the
Yep.
stimulus, you go through when you see some students, children with autism will have different events where people are like, that kid's really losing, or no, they're either overstimulated, understimulated, antecedent events. Like, what are all these things? So I can totally understand, like, as a parent, uh, I believe I could understand that as a parent, you went through this period of time of frustration, thinking like, why doesn't anybody just know? Why doesn't anybody just give me some example of something that's happened in the past that I can relate into our certain current
Right.
experience and help out? Um,
Hmm.
did you have many moments of
Yeah.
that uh, as your son was growing
I,
up?
what was going through my mind at that time was that old Walt Whitman, men lead lives of silent desperation. And I
Mm,
felt like my wife was so emotional at the time. I didn't feel like I could really go to her with that, right? And where do you go with that information? And I think it goes back to being a father about, you go, even me going to my father, and he has a hard time relating to even that, right? So
yeah,
as a man, where do you go with those type of things, those kind of problems, especially if they don't understand, right? If they don't have, they haven't been through the fire, right? On that
right,
side, it's hard to kind of completely relate. Kind of
right,
like starting a business, and you're telling
yeah,
somebody that's never had one. You're like, okay,
yeah.
it just doesn't, it
Just
doesn't
speaking
resonate.
another language. I
Yeah,
want to circle back to
exactly.
something you said at the beginning, and that was the importance of the whole family. You gave those three: there's family centered, child centered,
Mhm.
parent centered. What are some of the keys now in this experience that you have probably trial and error? You did some great things, you did some things you probably thought were not so great, but with the goal of being family centered in mind. What is the importance of whole family support when it comes to raising a child with autism?
Yeah. I think I would say probably the number one thing is, I think as a parent with a child with special needs, there is a limiting self-belief that you can have for your own child, right? You can
Mm,
have them for yourself, but you can also have them for your child and go, he can't, he's not able to do that, right? And I think adding, he's not able to do that now is
mm,
such a powerful thing, because I talk to a lot of parents, and what their issue is, they go, "Oh, little Johnny can't do that. He can't do that." I'm like, "Well, where is he at? Like, he can't do that now." And they're like taken back. I'm like, Now he can't do it." So I think the biggest thing for me was, I felt like, and he would surprise me. My son surprises me every day. There's always something that I'm like, what am I doing? Why am I limiting him that way? Right? He's
right.
not limiting him. So I'm doing that as a parent. And I also feel like that the second thing probably is, I think it's partial. The job for the mom is that there's an enabling thing. And I think that's probably something that my wife and we come at things different on that side, because I feel like my job is to prepare him for life, and her
Hmm.
job is to make sure there's unconditional love and support, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece, right, where I don't want him to be enabled either, right? Which is really hard, because I know where that love comes from, obviously, right? Because you want him to do
Right.
well. So
Right. And then how did you and your wife work together to make sure that all the focus wasn't just one child centered, because you have another son, and that you're equally supporting your other son as well through this? And what role did he play as a sibling in the whole family support model?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was important, the communication with the whole family, because going back to being family centric, it was important for us to communicate. Like, for example, like my wife is one of 10, right? And
Wow.
I'm an only child.
Okay, that's a
So the
different.
dynamic couldn't be any more different, right? So there's like communication that has to have. And I mean, I feel like that I try hard to over communicate, and especially regarding my son, I don't want him treated any other way,
Mm,
right? But I think the outward the world itself. And I'll give you a quick story. My son was doing kind of a fitness test, and he had 5 stations. And I don't know if it's a statewide thing or not, but it's a fitness test. So I was there for him. One was like he had to run a mile, one was sit ups, one was push ups, just basic stuff, right? I purposefully, the first 4 things, I didn't share because, and there are people stationed that are there to help the kids at each area, right? And this
right.
is this is all typical kids. This is not just special needs. It's everybody mixed, right? So no
Yeah.
one knows. So so those first 5 stations, I said 0 to anybody, and they treated him, and he did fine, right? Purposefully on the last station was push-ups, and as soon as I told her that he is on the spectrum, she made all these modifications, all these
Mm,
changes, you know what, he doesn't have to do it, don't worry about it, right? And so I don't want that for my son, right?
no,
I don't want that. I want him to be treated the same because he can do things, right? And so I think the fathers, that's something that we want to see him challenged, right? I want to see him challenged in things because that's how you learn, you know?
right. I love it. I love it. How do you challenge your son day to day as a dad? How
You
do you
know,
challenge him?
what's interesting is on the father side, I get to see like there's certain therapies, ABA therapy, speech, there's all these therapies that he gets, right? And I think that from a mental standpoint, I think that I work a lot with the ABA therapist and have them train me on how to work with my son, because I think it's important from a father's perspective to understand like how my son learns. Like how does he learn? Like if I want to teach him something new, something as simple as taking a shower by himself, right?
Yeah.
What are the what do I have to do? What does that look like for me? So I work hard with the other therapist on that side to kind of figure that out. But I'll tell you this, because I do have a belief that it's all connected to where the physical fitness piece, like him being active and doing things on that side, which obviously speaks to the father side of things, improves everything else. It
Mm,
was a game changer for us when we got him his own APE
wow.
instructor and things, because a lot of things improved. For example, like he had a hard time pressing down with a pencil or a pen, right? Just that force of fine motor skills.
Mhm.
And then when he started, we started doing push-ups and hanging, 10-second hangs and those and improved his grip strength. So now he has no problem doing that, right? But none of the therapists said that. Like no
Yeah.
one, speech therapist didn't go, oh, well, he should be doing something, to increase his grip strength. But I mean, you
Yeah.
learn it along the way. I think it was very impactful to keep him active because it is all connected.
Okay. I want to shift gears to you again. So you had a background in business. Your son gets a diagnosis. What were you doing at the time? And then in your journey, how did you get from that point? Because I'm sure it looked very different for you than it does now. How'd you get from that point to where you're at now with parenting autism?
Yeah, at the time I was doing some consulting and had another company I was working on. And for me, when he got a diagnosis, you know, my initial thought is, I'm in an office setting now, right? How do I get to a place where I can create a life that I want, that I can help him, right? And
Mhm.
and create, what does that the family dynamic look like? Because I knew my wife would need more support. And so, how do I start creating that world? And so we did kind of a survey of parents, and we created a small little like an MVP, minimal viable product, on that side to kind of bring in other parents, because I wanted to see if is this just me? Like I don't want to be in a bubble with this, right? Maybe it's just
Right.
me. I don't know. So my thing was we opened the doors to parents on that needed support, and in 2.5, 3 months we had almost 3,000 parents. So
Wow.
clearly we were onto something, and other parents really identified with it pretty quick. And so from those conversations went into, okay, what are the 3 things that you need, right? And you
Yeah.
touched on one of them. One is community. And we kept hearing the word navigate all the time. I need help
Yeah.
navigating. How am I going to navigate, right? And then the last thing really is, they wanted results. They wanted to figure out like what's working, right?
Right.
Because for example, for me, if I knew of 200 other families that have a child that's 14 years old, boy, that's nonverbal, and the things
Yeah.
that they've done that have been successful, how much farther would I be, right? So I think that part was really important for me, at least on that side. It was validation that we were on to something at that point.
And so you have this, like, oh, I'm gonna make a viable product, see if there's some demand here. 3,000 people, 3,000 families show interest. Yeah. At that time, do you go all in? Like, this is where we're going. We're going to start building something out. Or did you put it off for a little bit and wait?
I felt like that I needed to get my family, my language of my house in order. I need to get my
Yeah.
house in order
Fair.
and make sure
Yep.
that my son has all the support before I would start doing this on another scale, because I have been part of numerous startups and understand what kind of stress that has on the family,
Yeah.
and being real about that. And I want to make sure that my wife and my family was kind of bought in on what we were doing here, because we want to be in a position to help other families, but this whole journey started with, how can I help my son?
Yeah.
Right? How can I create breakthroughs for my son? And that's where this all stemmed from. And we've done stem cell therapy, we've done all different types of therapies, and for us at least, we wanted to get to a place where we can find breakthroughs for him, right? But we felt like during the journey, why not help other families at the same time?
Amazing. So tell us about parenting autism. What is it? Who does it help? How do people get connected?
Yeah. So with parenting autism, we're basically, like I said, we're finding breakthroughs for families. So we're helping them navigate the world of autism, right? And something that's happened, it's really interesting, is some of the problems that we had before, and the pain points about people giving advice and not knowing where your child is at on the spectrum, right?
Yep.
We solving that piece, being able to have something that you can ask, and somebody can help navigate and be almost part of the family, if you
Yeah.
will. That's a
Yeah.
proactive part of the family. And especially now with technology coming to the place where we can take the benefit of, the good things that the parents are doing, right? That data set, we can take that with AI and we can blend it into all the resources we've gathered, right? So now you start building something to where, that with our navigator technology, we can really step in and help parents navigate the world of autism and stay ahead of things, right? It's a proactive, part of the family. So for example, if you're starting school in 4 months, it's going to say, okay, well, hey, you're starting school, make sure here are the questions to ask around your IEP, which is
Mm.
something that every family needs. So it helps
Yeah.
families prepare. And this is, as a father and as a family, as a parent, the worst feeling is to feel like you're not doing enough.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Everybody's busy. Everybody's doing things. You have other kids. You have other commitments. People are pulling at you left and right, and now you get a diagnosis,
Right.
right? And so now what? You know what I mean?
Okay. So for
Now what?
you,
So
yeah,
yeah,
as a dad, you get to that now what? There's people who are
yeah,
reaching out, they're searching, they don't know where to go, they come across your
yeah,
work. How's it going to help them? Give us like three things that someone who's out there right now with that question, now what? Give them like a
yeah,
three-step process to get started.
yeah. So the now what piece is the sense of community is the first thing, right?
Yeah.
So just like we talked about parents and our wives need to be supported on this, they need a sense of community and support. So that's where we started. So the idea is something as simple as like going to our Facebook group to where there's a sense of community and people are there talking about real things, right? And one of my pet peeves is I understand that there's issues and problems and things and a lot of things that need to be corrected and solved. I get all that completely, but at the same time, I want to stay hopeful
Mm.
and inspirational around what can we do? What are the answers? So I want to spend more time on the answers, not the problems, right?
Yeah.
Because I think we get caught up in that cycle of just this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working. And we need to break that cycle. And I think a lot of parents, they just don't get the support. So being able to talk to other parents that are very similar, we're also going to have, and in our phase two of this, we're also going to have a parent pairing program because it's been so impactful on my wife and I to where we're going to start matching up parents, with other parents that are maybe 2 or 3 years ahead, but they have kids that are similar on the spectrum and be
Yeah.
able to match them up. So I just think that the community part is first. That's where we're starting.
That's amazing. I love that. There's so much power in community because when you feel that you can surround yourself with people who, one, you can trust, and two, you can relate to. Everybody's journey is different, but if you can see little bits and pieces in the community, like this family has this and this family has this, just like you were saying, you start to feel like, oh, I belong here, and this is normal.
Yeah.
Like this is what people navigate when they're doing this as a family. I feel comfortable in this place. I feel supported in this place. And it's out of that where you're going to have conversations that will push, people forward, will help them grow, help their families grow, help their children grow. So no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and on the, and this on the cusp of all this AI and everything else. So
Right.
it's, the question is, it's getting support, and human support on that side becomes even more impactful, right? And it's
I
the other
love
reason
that you
that
said that.
we want, and going back to the now what, the navigate, or I'm sorry, the community part was first, right?
Yeah.
The navigate and then the solutions. Those are the
Right.
three things. And so part of the solutions piece is we've also went back and, from all of our parents asking for this is, once you get a diagnosis, what if there was a school or something around it, or an academy that could actually help parents, and it would be a learning place for parents that could
Wow.
all aggregate to one place? And
Yeah.
so we've created our Parenting Autism Academy that's around that piece, because it's weekly meetings that the parents all get together and talk about these things, and we bring on all kind of experts in the field of autism. So whether it's speech therapy, they're all the amazing people that are in that space. And so parents can ask questions and get things solved, and it gives them a roadmap, which I think is just really important.
Mm. Extremely important. Like
Yeah.
I've never been through something in my life that's been difficult where I haven't been, man, I wish there was just a map I could follow. It just give me the roadmap through this. So that the fact that you're
Yeah. And you,
providing that for families is powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's the starting point, right? Everybody has their own journey, right? And they're navigating their own path, but at the same time, you have to, before you break all the rules, you got to know them all first, right? You got to know what
Yeah.
the rules are. And I think that knowing the rules of where things and how to get things done in the world of autism, whether it's I have an ABA therapist that's just not working, can I get another ABA therapist?
Right.
I've seen families stay with ABA therapists that aren't very good at all when they didn't know they could make a change, right?
Yeah.
Something that simple.
Do you mind just real quick for the listeners who might not know, what does ABA stand for?
It stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis.
Excellent.
It's yeah, and there's a whole story behind it, but that's where parents tend to start with ABA therapy,
Mm.
because it can help intervene in terms of early intervention is the key around autism, and the sooner that you can get your child help, the better on that side. And getting a diagnosis is just crucial, right? And
Yeah.
I know there are some states, I know California and the West Coast, they do a decent job, and then New York and New Jersey, they do okay. But some of the states in between struggle a little bit with getting a diagnosis. But if you think that there is even a possibility, you should seek it out and figure out on that side, because you can't get any resources. And the average right now there for diagnosis is about 4.5 years old, right? When it
Okay.
should be really, we can do it at 2.5, 3. So
Wow.
it's really kind of late. Different cultures they're even longer, right? It could be 5 years or 6 years, right? But knowing it early on is crucial.
Amazing. So, Jason, if somebody wants to find more information about parenting autism, where can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to start, which I think is a good place, that whole community thing that we talked about is, going to the Facebook group, which is, I think it's the Parenting Autism group. That's where things are really kind of starting for us, because um, eh, parents have some amazing questions, right? And we have some things that are coming here in the next, 30 to 60 days that are really going to help. And I think we've done a good job of listening, and we put together a great team on parenting autism, on what we're going to be doing. And I also think the team part relates, and it goes back to, I think I brought up that, we have 7 different therapists slash teachers, right?
Mhm.
And I also think it's about families surrounding themselves and them building a team, right? You
Right.
should have somebody, a special needs attorney, right? To go through due process to get the best help for your child in the school system, right? You should have a great developmental pediatrician. You should have speech therapist if it's appropriate, right? There should be a team of people that you rely on for some of these questions, and you should have an open door to them, whether it's an email address or something. But you need to have a team, because once again, going back to support and community, it's so crucial.
Amazing. Jason, I got one more question for you. As a dad right now, what is one
Yeah.
area of growth or learning that you're excited about or diving into?
Um, for me, what's really interesting is I'm just doing this whole deep dive into longevity.
Mm,
And like right now is my day 2 of my 3-day water fast that I'm
okay.
doing. And you know, doing a lot of research around whether it's Dr. Huberman or Dr. Brecka or some of these other physicians, reading a lot around human longevity. And I think it's been spurred because I want to live a long life for my son, and I want to be around, and not just be around. I want to have a high quality of life. And what does that look like? And I think that it's been helpful with my wife seeing it because she's made adjustments, and not that I'm telling her to do those things, but she's seeing me do these things like the 3-day fast. She saw me like put things together for it and those kind of things. Kim, have you done a fast before?
Nope, not the water
Fasting?
fast. Nope. I've done
Yeah,
fasting
yeah.
before, but not the 3-day
Okay.
water fast you're speaking of. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that it helps with, but the longevity piece is probably, as a father, something that I'm looking at because I do want a high quality of life, for to be around for my kids and my family, those kind of things. So the longevity bug is in my ear right now.
Yeah, amazing. Jason, I want to thank you for taking time away from your family to be here with us. And the information that you're sharing is so powerful and meaningful for the families out there right now who are trying to navigate this, who might be at each of these cliffs, are going to need some type of support and some type of community. So thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Yep, happy to help. Thanks, Cam.